and welcome back. This video continues my discussion of Lord Dunmore's War based on my master's thesis research. If the lighting is a little off in this video, I apologize. I usually try to film during the day when I have natural light, and this time I didn't. It's pitch black outside. But you don't really need to see me anyway. It's the words that are important, right? And I want to ask, what is the goal of a historian? And I'm sure we can come up with a lot of answers, maybe teaching, but overall the idea of a historian is to contribute to historical knowledge, to contribute to what the discipline knows. I think that's why I've been looking forward to this particular video. You'd think that over 2 centuries later we'd know everything there is to know, but clearly not, because I actually got to name a battle. Now, before we continue, there's a couple things I want to cover. First, this is based on limited records in letters and official reports that I was able to find. There may be oral tradition of the Shawnee and Ohio Haudenosaunee that I'm not privy to, and if anyone from those tribes wants to comment below and add to the discussion, I would love to see that. I'm the first person I know of to call this an outright battle. And of course, when I say that, I'm talking about the history discipline. I'm not talking about the tribes themselves. Usually this is referred to as just part of what's called MacDonald's expedition, but I don't think that name really does it justice or really covers what occurred. I call it the Battle of Wakatomika, and that's kind of the final point here. Is I could be completely mispronouncing that. It's just something I've seen written. I have no frame of reference on how it's supposed to be said, so if I'm wrong, I apologize. But I've talked before, especially in the last video, about how Captain John Connolly used his position at Fort Pitt to just, make everything worse with everyone in the area. So, worse between Virginia and Pennsylvanians, worse between the colonists and the American Indians, just overall trying to start something. This increased with time. In June of 1774, there are reports of him stealing gunpowder from Pennsylvanian colonists and sending his militia after friendly American Indians who had just helped Pennsylvanian traders get home safely. Connolly specifically ordered his men to, quote, fall on every Indian they meet without respecting friend or foe, end quote. And he doesn't seem to be impressed by the idea, or the news that the Shawnee leaders have been able to maintain peace so far. They're keeping everyone kind of in line. Instead, Connolly states that his intent is to, quote, pursue every measure to offend them, end quote. Them being the American Indians. And if you ask me, that is spoken like a man who wants a war. Before I said, I can't prove whether this is incompetence or intention. Well, he's starting to make that clear. Now, Connolly had intended to lead a group of militia against the Shawnee, but he kept having to delay because of circumstances. Things came up. So in July, it was decided that Major Angus MacDonald would lead this group of militia instead. Their target was the upper Shawnee towns along the Muskingum River. Now, this is a highly strategic decision because, from what we can tell from reports, these are the Shawnee that are most disposed towards war. So even after leaving some of his men at Wheeling to help build Fort Fincastle, MacDonald still marches on these towns with about 400 militia. And that's a pretty sizable number for the time and the location. Now, the upper Shawnee town of Wakatomika was founded around 1758 when the inhabitants fled Pennsylvania. Of course, by 1774, these towns also included Ohio Haudenosaunee. But around the time MacDonald was marching to Wheeling and then on to these upper Shawnee towns, the Lenape Captain White Eyes was bringing news that the Shawnee had abandoned these towns, perhaps to escape the recent violence or because they anticipated attack. Now, when MacDonald arrives, he makes demands like he thinks everyone's still there in residence. And I've seen historians kind of tackle this in a number of ways. Some don't really explain it because they're kind of glossing over the situation in general. at least one was like, well, the Shawnee got tired of waiting and they went ahead and went back to their towns. I don't know that that's true. I haven't read anything, any primary documents that support that. Maybe they did. I don't know. And the other option is that maybe White Eyes and MacDonald kind of crossed paths and MacDonald just didn't get the intel. So that's kind of the problem with this in general, is it's hard to tell when you have so little to go on. But nothing reports seeing any women or children present. Maybe they were out of sight, maybe they kind of fled once again, but I'm not going to say either way. What we do know is that on August 2nd of 1774, MacDonald's men encountered a group of American Indians blocking the path to the towns. These warriors, quote, had made blinds on the path side to waylay the party who they expected to be coming against them, end quote. Now, some sources say this was 50 American Indians, some say 60. There's a letter that says it's 30, although that letter is kind of like news traveling along the frontier. It wasn't written by anyone who was present for these events. I think the key thing here is not how many there were. It's the fact that the American Indians chose to make a stand. They knew either way that they are grossly outnumbered, but they made a stand anyway. It was not an accident. Most likely, these men were Shawnee and Ohio Haudenosaunee. There's a chance that there could have been Lenape joining them, but we'll kind of get to that in a second. After the groups exchanged fire, MacDonald regrouped, left 25 men to guard the wounded, and pursued the rest of the warriors who had retreated. They went about 5 miles towards Snakestown, which is another of the upper towns. Around this time, they spot some more American Indians standing on the other side of the river. The account suggests that these men were kind of like hiding, but they spotted them anyway, and they invite them to come over to talk. These men were Lenape, and I can't swear to what role they were there to play. One account says they, quote, observed Indians posted on the bank intending to dispute our passage, end quote. Were they? Or did they just happen to be there and the colonists were thinking that all American Indians were the same, with the same goals, and who knows? They'd been ordered, though, not to attack any Lenape as long as they remained peaceful, presumably because Captain White Eyes was being so helpful over that year. And this is kind of where we get into the topic of, American Indians didn't have to obey their chiefs and their war leaders. They had autonomy. They could make their own decisions. So for all we know, these men could have been there to take part in trying to defend the upper towns, or they just happened to be in the area and they're being perceived as hostile just because of the color of their skin, essentially. We don't know. These Lenape, though, they brought over an Ohio Haudenosaunee man, one that had fought against MacDonald earlier in the day. And MacDonald gives the man a message to take to the others, demanding the release of 2 white hostages that had been taken from frontier raids. Some sources write as if MacDonald would have just turned around and just left if these hostages had been handed over. I don't think the evidence supports that at all. Complete opposite. In June, Dunmore had written to Connolly with very blatant instructions. Quote, I would recommend it to all officers going out on parties to make as many prisoners as they can of women and children, and should you be so fortunate as to reduce those savages to sue for peace, I would not grant it to them on any terms, till they were effectually chastised for their insolence, and then on no terms without bringing in 6 of their heads as hostages for their future good behavior. End quote. No. MacDonald was not going to leave that easily. The idea just does not mesh with the orders that were being sent out at this time. It makes absolutely no sense. Now, eventually, he got sick of waiting for this man to return who didn't, and they marched onward towards the towns. They entered one of them, which we don't have a name, so I don't know if it's Snakestown or what, but they entered one and they found the scalps of his men, quote, hung up like colors with the town evacuated, end quote. So, In the spirit of chastising them for their insolence, to borrow Dunmore's words, MacDonald ordered the towns burned. Homes, fields, everything. The reports estimate it included about 70 acres of planted corn and 300 to 400 bushels of preserved corn from the prior harvest. And that's in addition to all their homes. And we're not talking, I think some people get the idea in their head that these American Indians, they all lived in teepees like the Plains Indians, right? But they didn't. They had a number of sources refer to them as cabins. Like this, these are pretty substantial structures, and they're burned. Now, in a report to Lord Dartmouth, Dunmore declared that MacDonald's men had, quote, destroyed their town and totally erased their plantations, end quote. Now, being absolutely brilliant tacticians, MacDonald's men had no choice but to return to whaling at this point because they were out of food. After burning a bunch of corn that they could have eaten, they just ran out of food. Now, that said, this isn't a lot of detail. We don't have a lot of detail of what happened. It's really just a handful of reports. But what is clear is that a group of Shawnee and Ohio Haudenosaunee intentionally laid in wait to ambush the approaching militia under MacDonald. They knew they were outnumbered, but they weren't going to let MacDonald just march right in and destroy their homes without objection. And this means a couple of things in the context of Dunmore's War overall. First, during the hostilities that had occurred so far in 1774, this marks the largest group of American Indians to fight the colonists. We have a few raids going on along the frontier with, Logan and some others that are upset about what's going on, but these are very small raiding parties. This is far more substantial. And I assert that this is the first actual battle of Lord Dunmore's War. Point Pleasant is not the only battle, this is the first. And it's important to note that because in the Battle of Point Pleasant, Andrew Lewis's men, as you will find out, they are encamped, they are waiting for further orders. There had already been talk that they're going to be building a fort, but they're not necessarily acting aggressively quite yet. And Cornstalk's army attacks them. But in this case, it is the frontier, the colonists' militia that are specifically going and attacking the American Indians and destroying their homes. Widespread destruction, essentially, which really kind of changes the dynamic of how we think about these battles in this, yes, small Indian War. And understandably, the Battle of Wakatomika did nothing to improve relations on the frontier or encourage the tribes to make peace. All this talk from Dunmore and Connolly and everything, attacking these towns was not productive. Instead, attacks along the frontier, they increased. In the next video, I'm going to talk about the preparations being made by Andrew Lewis further south, and talk about the Sinking Creek Massacre. As always, I would love to hear your comments below, and please make sure that you hit that like button and subscribe to help the channel and help get that information out there. Like I've said before, my master's thesis, it's going to be published online, just like in a repository, just like every other thesis and dissertation. But because this is something that hasn't really even been named before, this is something specifically I'd really like to see get out there, so people have they at least know what happened. I can't give you the most complicated, detailed view of this battle in the world because we just don't have the reports to give us that data. But it still happened, and I want people interested in our colonial past to be aware of it. So, thanks for listening to me rant, and I will see y'all in the next video.